Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Vampire vs. Vampire, a Hong Kong action comedy horror flick from 1989. Now for years, this film was considered the unofficial fifth installment of the Mr. Vampire franchise, but we're not going to get into that because there's really no continuing storyline between these films anyways, so it doesn't really matter. The issue of what's canon or not canon in this franchise is kind of a moot point. You know, the best way to approach these movies is to simply watch a bunch of them and then rewatch the ones that you personally enjoy. And that's exactly what I've been doing lately, as I have separate review videos on the first 4 Mr. Vampire films on this channel. So how does Vampire vs. Vampire stack up against the rest? Well, one good thing right out of the gate is that Ching-ying Lam returns after missing the 4th installment. He plays the Chinese exorcist by the name of Master Cao, who is living the easy life right now with his 2 disciples, one of which is played by franchise regular Siu-ho Chin. They hang out in a little town with a little vampire kid who is harmless, but still finds ways of getting into trouble. So one day, they're exploring nearby water currents and discover the corpse of a European vampire in a nearby church. And as you might expect, the vampire awakens and conflict arises. Now, if you've seen any of the other films in this franchise, you already know that they infuse a healthy dose of comedy to supplement the supernatural action and shenanigans. Now, in my opinion, the best films of this franchise are the ones that mix in action at regular intervals. Vampire vs. Vampire begins with a funny child vampire scene, and then it shifts to a humorous ghost scene, and then it shifts to a humorous interaction with the nuns at the church that the vampire eventually rises from. Then it shifts back to some more funny ghost stuff. So, do you see a trend here? By the 30-minute mark, the opening 30 minutes are good and they're fun, but by the 30-minute mark, I was kind of itching for some vampire action. But there really are no memorable set pieces until after the 60-minute mark. Now that middle half hour does drag the film down a little bit because it just feels like there's too much filler here, not enough of the vampire conflict. And as I mentioned previously, I have now rewatched 5 of these Mr. Vampire films for these YouTube reviews. And I must say that Vampire vs. Vampire is the only one that is not quite as good as I remembered. In fact, a few of them improved upon repeat viewings. This one kind of dipped a little bit. The opening half hour, as I said, is fun. I like the cute little noises that the little vampire kid makes, too. It's pretty cute stuff. But that middle half hour, it's pretty average. Fortunately, things do pick up again during that final half hour, with a fun attack scene with some really nasty vampire bats. That's a good scene. And from that point on, it's a lot of fun again. You do have to wait, though, until that final half hour before the evil vampire even shows up, which I think is a problem here. But when he does show up, it provides some pretty fun moments. The final fight is pretty lengthy and entertaining. The vampire dude is pretty tough to kill, and there's a great stunt involving fire that lasts a little while as well. But even the finale could have been improved a little bit, I think, here. Remember, the evil vampire is more like the traditional Western vampire, but they don't really play up that aspect much for the final, half an hour. You would think there'd be, specific things that the priests would do that would not work against a traditional European vampire, instead of a Chinese hopping vampire, right? But they don't really play that up that much. I think that was kind of a missed opportunity. And with the title Vampire vs. Vampire, you don't really have a showcased vampire versus vampire fight at any point. Maybe like a Chinese vampire versus a Western vampire. You don't even really get that. There's a little scuffle at the end between the little kid vampire and the Western vampire. So that's another thing. I think if they would have increased those 2 elements, the traditional Western vampire, characteristics, as well as the vampire versus vampire stuff, and put that in the middle half hour, this film could have been awesome. But unfortunately, they don't do that. Kind of a missed opportunity. So, when all is said and done, I would say that Vampire vs. Vampire is kind of on the same level as a Mr. Vampire 2 or a Mr. Vampire 4. It's watchable, moderately entertaining, but it does not come close to rising to the level of the first Mr. Vampire or Mr. Vampire 3. So that's my thoughts on this one. I would moderately recommend it, but again, if you haven't seen any film in this franchise, you do Mr. Vampire 1 and 3 first, then hit the rest after. Now, Vampire vs. Vampire is available on DVD and Blu-ray. Just got a re-release, I think, a few months ago, and it's also a part of that 5-disc box set that's available on, I think it's on DDD House and Yes Asia. And as always, we'll see you next time.